Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this afternoon instead of
Recording in progress.
We are all here, and then it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 17th Wole Soyinka Center Media Lecture Series, which also marks the 91st birthday of Professor Wole Soyinka, the grand patron of the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism. And like we all know, Professor Wole Soyinka remains the first Nobel laureate in literature from Africa. And the Wole Soyinka Center for Media Lecture, Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism annual lecture is designed to examine various topical issues that are critical to the performance of the Nigerian media, issues that are fundamental to the political health of the country, its democracy, and this is in keeping with the fact that only a truly independent media, one that constantly engages with the citizens and is able to potentially serve as guardian of democracy. And that's the kind of media we all aim for and the one that we've all signed up to. This lecture series started in 2008, and since 2009, it's been held on the 31st of every July, which is Wole Soyinka's birthday, our one and only professor. And this year's theme is surveillance and safety and the silencing of truth. It captures a growing threat that journalists face all over the world. We are being watched, not just by hostile governments or powerful institutions, but through tools and systems that are becoming more advanced, more sophisticated, and more invasive. So what do? I think there is a lot we can do. Once again, I'm Jimmy Saleh, and I will serve as your host and guide through this event. Thank you once again for joining us. We have an impressive lineup of speakers. But before I introduce you to these speakers, some we've known, may we please take the national anthem.
Nigeria,
If we are ready with the national anthem.
Our own dear native land, though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Nigerians old and proud to serve our sovereign motherland. Our flag shall be a symbol that truth and justice reign. In peace all battle honored, and this we count as gain. To hand unto our children a banner without stain. O God of all creation, grant this our one request. Help us to build a nation where no man is oppressed, and so with peace and plenty, Nigeria may be blessed.
Thank you. That was the national anthem. Angela, I can see you've raised your hand. Is there an immediate concern, or should I go ahead?
No, let me lower it. I wasn't even aware I'd raised it. Thank you.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. So thanks once again for joining us. And I would like to start by recognizing the presence of some key personalities this afternoon. Professor Rocco Shokoni, the board chair for WSCIJ. I don't know if he's on this call. Presumably, yes, he is. Mr. GT Ogunye, the board secretary. And of course, not forgetting the founder, Uncle D. And then again, we also have our keynote speaker for today. I will make a detailed introduction by reading her citation. I'm referring to Angela Quintel from South Africa. You all are welcome. And of course, not forgetting our panelists, Queen McHugh, Executive Director at Article 19, Fisayo Shoimbo, Founder and Editor-in-Chief, Foundation for Investigative Journalism, Sonia Smith from Namibia, Correspondent, Associated Press, and every other guest here this afternoon. Thank you for joining this virtual call. So I welcome you to this special event marking the 91st birthday of Professor Wole Soyinka. And we're also going to use this opportunity to examine the threats we face in the discharge of our legitimate duties as journalists. It could be intimidation, it could be surveillance, and so many other things. So how do we stay safe? And one person who has managed to stay safe over the decades is the founder of this center, Mr. Dapo Oloremi, and he has been safely guiding hundreds of other journalists to hold power to account. And I welcome you once again, and I invite you for your welcome remarks, Dapo. Over to you. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Such a great honor to be able to have Angela Quintel, we all know as a quintessential, formidable defender of press freedom. I said earlier, welcome to Nigeria, but of course, in a virtual sense. But I also like to thank our panelists. We really have a 5-star cast here today, so it looks like we're really going to have a very consequential conversation. So I will just like to welcome you in a few words on behalf of the board. First to express that this gathering being a tribute to the indomitable spirit of Professor Wole Soyinka, who we all know Africa's first Nobel laureate in literature, a man whose words and courage have long lit the way for justice, freedom, and unapologetic truth. I think the theme of this year, surveillance, safety, and silencing of truth, cuts right to the core of his legacy. And it's a theme that feels more urgent than ever, as Jimmy had just reminded us. I think with the incredible lineup of stars speakers we have today, I'm certain we'll reach out, especially when it comes to what it means for journalism in Nigeria and for our region today. I think the thing, just to make one little more point, isn't just a catchy phrase. I think it's a mirror held for the struggles that journalists face in the world that's more connected and more controlled than ever before. The digital age has been a game changer, no question about that. It's given us tools to share stories like never before, but we also know that it has also brought a very darker side of the world where the lines between state power, corporate greed, and personal privacy are now so tangled, they are nearly impossible to separate. Surveillance once just a buzzword for, I think, people who do sometimes nefarious work, either as spies or even as bad governments. It's now everywhere where they track us, our calls, our lives, and every action we take on our tools. And for journalism, I think this is not just a case of nuisance. It's something we would like to agree is a direct threat to the freedom of the profession. It is not for me to waste too much time, doing a whole lot of talk here, but I also want to say that bringing it all together, that today we are also in a celebratory mood. Our speakers hopefully will dive deep into the nuts and bolts of this theme. Everything from tech solutions to legal protection to the mental toll this work takes on us as journalists. I'm hoping and we believe that we'll hear more about the ethical tightropes that we have to walk and the creative ways that we've had to adapt. as well as the strategies that we can all use to keep our truths alive. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you, with gratitude, for those who are connected, for our board, but, more than anything, for the incredible team led by, uh, she's a titan, Turaya Alaka, who's really helped to build the center and put it on a world map. So again, welcome everyone here, and we hope that we're going to have a very great session. And thank you all. Jimmy, let's get started.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Uncle B. Thank you for your remarks. Before we proceed, I would just like to say that I was informed earlier that we were meant to have a representative of the Dutch embassy. That's the Royal Netherlands Embassy in Abuja. Even if they are not here, please, if you come across Dr. Annelius Hoff or any staff of the Royal Dutch Embassy, please give the center's gratitude, regards, and appreciation to them for their untiring support to the center and to expanding the civic space, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa. Now, whenever and wherever journalists are attacked or harassed, one organization that immediately and unconditionally shows up is the Committee to Protect Journalists. And I personally commend the center for nominating the committee's regional director for Africa as our keynote speaker today. So ladies and gentlemen, if you are ready to know more about Angela Quintel, so am I. I will start now by taking you through what she's been able to accomplish and her background. Angela holds a Bachelor of Journalism and a Bachelor of Laws from Rhodes University. Before joining the Committee to Protect Journalists in 2016, Quintel worked as an editor and journalist for more than 2 decades in South Africa. She was the editor of the Mail and Guardian, one of South Africa's leading investigative newspapers. She also edited The Witness and the Mercury newspapers. And she's held so many senior positions in the South African media landscape, including group political editor at the Independent Newspaper Group and parliamentary editor for the then National News Agency, the South African Press Association. Quintel changed direction from a career in human rights and constitutional law to become a journalist in 1992 during South Africa's transition to democracy. She was presidential correspondent during Nelson Mandela's term as South Africa's first democratically elected president. She has also served as the Secretary General and Treasurer of the South African Editors Forum, SANEF. And before joining CPJ, she was Media Freedom Committee Chair in South Africa for One IFRA's program on strengthening media and democracy. Quintel is a recipient of SANEF's Steve Ross Leslie Award for her commitment to media freedom in Africa and is one of 50 recipients of Rhodes University's School of Journalism and Media Studies Distinguished Alumni Awards to mark its 50th anniversary. Now you can see with these impressive credentials, Angela is exactly an establishment's nemesis and nightmare, a constitutional lawyer, and also a professional journalist leading a newsroom, someone who knows how to turn up the heat, as it were, from 2 sources. Thank you, Angela, for accepting our invitation to serve as our keynote speaker today. You have the floor for the next 15 minutes, starting now. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you so much. Distinguished guests, colleagues and friends, on behalf of the Committee to Protect Journalists, an independent, global, non-profit organization defending press freedom worldwide, I'm honored to join you as we celebrate the 91st birthday of Professor Wole Soyinka, a towering figure in literature, human rights, and the pursuit of truth. As Professor Soyinka reminds us, books and all forms of writing have always been objects of terror to those who seek to suppress truth. This is why so often those in power will try to silence journalism, to hide the truth, and protect their interests at the expense of citizens. So it's a real privilege to speak today in Prof. Soyinka's honor about a matter of growing urgency, the threat of surveillance, not just to journalist safety and privacy, but to truth itself. Surveillance is not a distant, abstract issue. It is here, it is shaping the world we live in, across Africa and globally. And let's be clear, surveillance isn't just about technology. It's about what that technology enables: fear, self-censorship, silence. When journalists are watched, sources dry up. When truth tellers are harassed, corruption thrives. Journalists cannot do their work without secure, private communication. They cannot build trust with sources. They cannot hold power to account. And when surveillance strips away that privacy, it doesn't just endanger individuals, it undermines journalism itself. Now, abuse of surveillance is particularly insidious because it frequently occurs in secret. That's why we must expose it, talk about it, and resist it, all of us together. Now, let me pause for a moment of personal reflection. As a rookie reporter starting out during South Africa's transition in 1992 to democracy in 1992, we were taught something sacred. Protect your confidential sources at all costs. If it came to it, I knew I might have to go to jail. Now, under apartheid, Section 205 of South Africa's Criminal Procedure Act was used to force journalists to reveal their sources. Those who refused were jailed. After Nelson Mandela became our first democratically elected president in 1994, an understanding was reached between the South African National Editors Forum and authorities that Section 205 wouldn't be used to compel journalists to disclose their sources. But that understanding is effectively obsolete. Today, Section 205 is still used, not to subpoena journalists directly and to force them to disclose their sources, but to compel telecom companies to hand over journalists' call records. This metadata, who they spoke to, when, and for how long, can expose sources and compromise investigations, all without the journalist ever knowing. It's a quiet form of surveillance with minimal oversight. And now it's compounded by spyware and digital intrusion. Governments no longer need to knock on your door. They can just reach into your phone. And it's not just governments. Private actors who deploy surveillance tools against journalists illegally, they do it. And at CPJ, we track surveillance closely. Who is targeted? How? And under what legal framework? We document these abuses and raise the alarm. But we must also amplify the efforts and strategies to curb these abuses. Surveillance is dangerous because privacy is essential to press freedom. That may seem obvious, but in an age of escalating digital intrusion, it bears repeating. Journalism depends on private communication. Undermining such privacy doesn't just impact individuals, it harms society. So let me share a few examples. In Nigeria, police have repeatedly accessed journalists' telecom data, the metadata from their calls, to track and lure journalists into arrest in retaliation for their work. They do this without warrants. permitted by loopholes in communications regulations. Now, the Constitution of Nigeria safeguards privacy, yet the legal framework contradicts this. We actually raised these concerns in a letter to President Tinubu about 3 months after he took office. And yet, there have been no efforts by authorities to implement the necessary reforms that would safeguard journalists from such surveillance. Robust legal protections are becoming even more important as tools and tactics of surveillance become more sophisticated and invasive. Spyware has been used to target hundreds of journalists worldwide, including those in Africa. This powerful software can exploit vulnerabilities to secretly access the target's phone and then live inside, granting the attacker effectively total access, including to all communications, contacts, photos, and other information. It may also turn on the device's camera and microphone to capture information on the surroundings and nearby conversations. In Togo, spyware has been used against journalists and civil society. Some describe the looming threat as torture and feel like they have no private life. Even when they are in exile, the surveillance continues, illustrating an example of transnational repression. Veteran Togolese reporter Ferdinand Ayite called it, and I quote, permanent fear. Now, this isn't just about two countries. Across our continent, journalists face sophisticated threats, from malware that lives inside phones to police seizing devices and extracting their contents with digital forensic tools. Now, in 2018, intelligence agents demanded passwords from my colleague and me during our detention in Tanzania. During the raid on our hotel rooms and before they took us away, I managed to alert my colleagues at our New York headquarters. CPJ immediately activated emergency protocols, and our passwords were changed remotely. But those agents weren't worried. They boasted they had Israeli technology and could bypass those protections. We've seen cases in Botswana, in Ghana, and elsewhere. Often, reporters are arrested and their phones immediately confiscated, not just to intimidate, but to extract information. Don't think that because you refuse to divulge your password, you've escaped harm. This is not theoretical. It's happening, and the harms are real. The surveillance industry profits from this. A court filing in the case between WhatsApp and the NSO group revealed that Pegasus spyware had targeted individuals in 51 countries, 13 in Africa. This isn't isolated misuse. It's a market. This is a business model, and journalists are paying the price. Now, the situation presents an opportunity and a responsibility for African journalists to investigate the surveillance industry. Who buys the technology? Who reaps the profits? And who is harmed? Governments also have a role. In Botswana, a proposed surveillance bill would have allowed warrantless interception and communication. But a powerful pushback by local, regional, and international organizations forced the government to revise the bill. It now requires judicial oversight. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of collective action. In South Africa, the Constitutional Court issued a landmark ruling in 2021. It found that the government's mass interception of communications violated the Constitution. The court ordered reforms to RICA, the country's surveillance law, and mandated interim protections for journalists and their sources. Many of you may know him. Sam Soul of the Amabungani Center for Investigative Journalism brought that case. The state monitored Saul's communications for several months. He went to court and he won. Now, the principles at stake here aren't foreign imports. They are African values. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights has enshrined strong principles for privacy and expression. The Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa is a powerful, homegrown standard. Our governments must now live up to it. As authoritarianism rises worldwide, Africa must stand firm. We know what it means to fight for freedom, to push back against colonialism and repression. We know what it means to resist oppression. So this gathering today is not just a tribute to a literary icon, it is a call to action. We owe it to the journalists who have been jailed, to the whistleblowers who have gone silent, to the public who are denied the right to know. We owe it to the truth. As Professor Soyinka reminds us, the greatest threat to freedom is the absence of criticism. So let's defend that freedom, all of us, together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you for that very bold and clear picture of the situation at hand. I don't know how to do the virtual clap, but for those who know how to do it, please, Angela deserves a virtual round of applause. Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, so we've had it all. When journalism, when journalists are watched, sources dry up. That to me is fundamentally at the heart of Angela's speech. Please, may I request you, Angela, to remain on this call, because when we come to listen to the panelists, there will definitely, there could be one or two questions coming your way. So I would like to quickly go ahead and introduce our panel for today, but I will take the liberty of hosting this event to please summarize your lovely resumes, starting with Queen McHugh, who is the Executive Director of Article 19, an international organization defending freedom of expression. She brings over a decade of experience in human rights, digital policy, and civic space protection. With your kind permission, Queen, may I stop here? Yeah, because I'm trying to manage the time. There's an impending big breaking story. Once it is confirmed, may have to say it here, and then maybe some people might want to drop off to go and attend to some urgent editorial matters. And Fisayo Shoimbo is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Foundation for Investigative Journalism. With over a decade of newsroom experience, he served in senior editorial roles across some of the country's most prominent newsrooms, including the Cable, International Center for Investigative Reporting, and Sahara Reporters. I also request your permission to stop here, Fisayo. Thank you very much. And of course, Sonia Smith. She's a multi-award winning journalist with over 10 years of experience in journalism based in Windhoek, Namibia. She has a proven track record of producing high-quality investigative stories. She writes for the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism. She is also a correspondent for the Associated Press and the Namibian Sun newspaper. So here we have it. Thank you very much. So if I would like to start with Queen. I'm sure we all listened to Angela's very important speech. So for the next 5 minutes, what will be like your takeaways from Angela's speech, Queen?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to join this panel to celebrate the 91st birthday of Wole Soyinka. And I want to start maybe where Angela left off with the quotes that she had from the great man, which is the greatest threat to freedom is the absence of criticism. And I think one of the things that we need to understand about the worlds that we find ourselves in right now is there is a fundamental battle going on over power, over systems of government. And absolutely critical to that power battle that's happening is access to information and access to the freedom to speak, because this power battle is very much powered by itself a battle over narrative, over whose stories are going to be heard, what information is going to be heard, and how. And that is a key component where we're looking at this issue of surveillance and spyware and the intersection of these repressive techniques, which are fundamentally designed to, again, ensure that there can be no criticism of power. Because that's what the power structure wants right now. They want a clear playing field to own the information space, to set their agendas. And journalism is fundamentally the irritant in that struggle that they have. Journalism at its best is about liberating, and it's about providing information, and it's about pushing back on narratives and providing an attitude and an avenue for criticism to be heard. What we're witnessing globally right now is a trend in which authoritarian regimes will weaponize laws against journalists, particularly using national security, anti-terror, and cybercrime legislation to justify crackdowns. And that itself, as Angela was just mentioning, then becomes a tool for transnational repression, making it unsafe for journalists and critics everywhere. This is then, of course, married up with what she was also talking about. We have the private surveillance by governments using spyware and national security laws. I'll give a couple examples of those. But that's also married up with the vast amounts of kind of corporate surveillance, which is there. By which I mean the vast amount of data collection that is being done by the large tech companies. In fact, the amount of data that's actually held on us as individuals, as she mentioned, in terms of some of the access to get the attempts of governments to get access to metadata, that data is all privately held. And in fact, it's the absence of strong data protection laws, which means that in some cases for governments, it's easier just to go to the platforms and get very private, sensitive, detailed information on us than it is to actually deploy their own spyware against us. Spyware is expensive. Getting the information from the companies is actually relatively cheap and inexpensive. And so we have this interesting confluence right now where the states have more and more sophisticated tools to be deployed against journalists through spyware in terms of literal tool. Then there's the legal tool, the national security and cybercrime laws. And that is then married up with the corporate surveillance of all of our data, which is another tool the governments can tap into to, again, limit the space for privacy. And as Angela said, it's privacy in which privacy allows us to live our lives and allows journalism to flourish. So one of the things that I wanted to mention and touch into a little bit here is this idea of increased surveillance as part of the infrastructure in which we live. One of the key trends that we have seen around the world now, and this is everywhere from Africa to the United States to Europe, is the idea of creating smart cities, which sounds great on the surface. You know, smart city, who wouldn't want to be in a smart city? But smart cities are fundamentally based on surveillance technology. And that is married up with artificial intelligence to then create pretty much a constant state surveillance mechanism. And we're seeing these smart cities and intelligent traffic control systems along that deployed increasingly in Africa, Niger, in Mali, and Burkina Faso, often in partnership with Russia in some places, which are really weaponizing the public surveillance against political dissidents, and trying to solidify kind of their control over the information space in Africa. There's another smart city proposal right now in Senegal. So what can we do about this environment that we find ourselves in? Just really quickly to leave space for everyone to speak. Article 19, along with a number of people on this call, have actually been calling for there to be a global moratorium on the purchase of spyware and the international export of spyware until proper guidelines can be put in place, until a human rights framework for the use of spyware can be developed and deployed. As well as, much more closer to home, it's absolutely essential to have strong data protection laws to close the loopholes that allow for governments to get access to sensitive data very readily and very easily. Companies need to ensure that the data they own on us is segregated and protected to minimize that vector of attack potentially on journalists. With some of these different measures, moratorium on spyware, strong data protection laws, closing the national security loopholes, which allow broad language to allow basically any infringement of freedom of expression to be covered under national security. If we do those three things, we can fundamentally start rebuilding an environment where freedom of expression can flourish in Africa and beyond. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join with the lecture today.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time. And whilst you were giving your speech, you were making your contribution, we got news of the passing of Nigeria's former president, retired General Muhammadu Buhari. He'd been ill at the London hospital. Yeah, so we're getting reports coming through. We are flagging this because perhaps some of us might need to drop off to go and attend to this very important coverage. Yes, that we can very well understand. Yeah. Now, having said that, my key takeaways from all this is, in the end, it is down to us as journalists to see what we can do. I made a note of what you said, a global moratorium on the purchase of spyware. That is one. But within our gift, what can we do? Let's say we are covering protests. I'm sure some newsrooms might not even have protocols in place for safety and health training, for example, how to avoid danger, something as basic as staying safe online. What is the state of our digital hygiene, for example? If we are covering unrests or protests, and perhaps one of us attacked, are other members of the team trained to give emergency medical care like first aid to stop the bleeding before calling for an ambulance or rushing the colleague to hospital while the colleague is busy bleeding out? Fisayo, over to you, because someone who directly is in the front line of all these issues, what do you have to say, Fisayo?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. It's always great to see Angela Pintal anywhere. Were it not for people like her in 2019, I don't know what would have happened to me when I ran into problems after I went undercover in prison and the government wanted to arrest me and I went into hiding. Angela was one of the people who constantly found a way to stay in touch and see how much support I could get. So Angela, well done for the work you and the CPJ do. I'll speak quickly for 5 minutes, focusing on, just a minute, focusing on how surveillance is not just high-tech, but institutional, deeply entrenched, and then what it means for investigative journalism in practical terms. And I'll start with a true life experience. About 3 years ago, I met a young Nigerian campus journalist that I thought was fantastic talent for the future, and he always wanted to become a journalist. 2 weeks ago, he reached out to me. He was preparing for his final semester in school, and he wrote to me saying that I have always had the passion for journalism. However, due to the disturbing situation of our country, including the brutalization of journalists and the deprivation of their basic rights, my burning passion is slowly eroding. So yes, we can talk about the impact of surveillance on investigative journalism, on democracy, but we also should remember that it is impacting the quality of hands that we can attract into the media. Quite unfortunately, the government is not interested in slowing down on its crackdown on journalists. Between 2013 and 2022, the Nigerian government spent $2.7 billion, invested $2.7 billion in surveillance equipment contracts. It may shock you that in 2022 alone, the government's security budget was 2.7 trillion naira. $2.7 billion in naira at current exchange rate is about 4.185 trillion naira. So by my estimation, the government is even more interested in surveilling journalists and rights defenders than securing the people. The threat is not about to reduce. From time to time, it keeps happening. Journalists in almost every notable Nigerian newsroom journalists have been arrested, tracked, surveilled by the government. There was a journalist from FIJ in 2 years ago or last year. The National Cybercrime Center just intercepted his telephony, and tracked him, and they got him. There's also institutional surveillance. A lot of times Nigerians talk about being on the watch list of the DSS, the Department of State Services. But then there are also people who get watched by the DSS, for instance, without placing them officially on the watch list. People who get watched through the back door. And because of that, they think that they are safe, whereas they aren't. There's cross-institutional surveillance. I remember that last year when I was arrested by the army and I was in detention, I don't think I ever said this in public, first time. A military official who was with me, was grilling me at the time, received a call from someone closely linked to the Nigerian Customs Service. And it was on the phone, it was sounding agitated and was saying, you just cannot let this guy go. This is what this guy does to security institutions in this country. You just cannot let it go. It was such an impassioned plea, that I was shocked by what would have happened if that caller was the one to decide my fate. So my final reflection would be that there's a lot of fear-mongering beyond just journalists getting afraid, or young people, getting afraid of wanting to become full-time journalists. There's fear-mongering. They have friends, they have family who keep telling them, this is not the kind of environment where you can practice journalism. And I think that if we don't get to a point where we find a way to counterattack the surveillance threats that journalists face, we might get to a point where brain drain in journalism is not strictly about pay, but it's also about security.
Thank you, Sayo. I will give you the floor in a minute, Sonia, but not before we take this question from Ghana, a question from Peter Adofo Ashanti from Energy News Africa. And I would like to direct this question to Angela. What can you do to fight physical attacks on journalists in Ghana? On Friday, at least 2 of our colleagues were attacked for covering an election from 19 polling stations. I think this problem is not just peculiar to Ghana, it happens all over the place. So, Angela?
Thank you. Peter, I read with concern these reports. I actually saw this yesterday. And obviously, one of the things that CPJ has to do is to document these violations. So we'll certainly be reaching out to those who've been affected. And if you can, I'm happy to give my email at the end of this. And if you can contact me directly, make sure that our guys will chat to you. Unfortunately, when it comes to Ghana and so many other countries across Africa and the world, but obviously because it's the Africa program, I can only speak on behalf of the Africa program. We've seen this all the time. There's a total impunity when it comes to attacks on journalists, covering elections in particular, but just generally. And Ghana, unfortunately, has what's supposed to be the beacon, Peter. You know, we looked at Ghana as being the country where in Africa we could appreciate that there was press freedom. But more and more we have seen that journalists are under attack. We actually wrote to President Mahama, in fact, 3 months after, earlier this year, after he became president. And we raised concerns about this very issue, because I think when you allow impunity, it's very easy for everyone else to join in to attack journalists because they know that there isn't going to be any sort of accountability. Let's also remind people on this call that we still have the murder of an investigative journalist, right? Ahmed Devela, who was killed for his work, was murdered. And to this day, we have yet to see justice in his case. So Ghana should be out there, should be leading the way, and it has not. And it's really up to journalists and organizations like CPJ to continue that fight. We continue to talk to authorities. We continue to push for government to ensure that it's not just lip service, that there is genuine accountability. And when those who attack journalists, they must be arrested, they must be prosecuted, and they must be sent to jail. Thanks, Peter.
Angela, thank you for your patience, Sonia. I just have one follow-up question for Angela on this. Is there a protocol in place for reporting intimidation and harassment, Angela?
I'm sorry, did you say, is there a protocol in place?
The last of these attacks again. Yeah, like if I want to report harassment, intimidation, arrests colleagues, is there like a hotline, for example?
There isn't, but
where I can reach out to the CPJ. So
yeah,
this is what has just happened
there is. There is, and certainly you'll find all our contact details on our website. But may I also say that we also work very closely with organizations on the ground. So if, for example, you reached out to the Ghana's Journalists Association, and in fact, I know that they issued a statement yesterday, they too can contact us on your behalf. But we're there, we've got people on the ground. We are the ones that we're very lucky because we don't believe that we sit in isolation either, you know, where we're based in Nairobi or in Accra or whatever. We are working with organizations on the ground, and that's how we also get that information. But yes, our contact details are on our website, cpj.org, and you're welcome to contact us anytime. And as I said, I'll give you my email. It's Quintal, as in my surname, Quintal @cpj.org. And Peter, we generally don't sleep. There's too much going on. Too many journalists are being attacked throughout our continent.
Right, thank you. And this is also to announce that in a short while, there will be an evaluation form posted for all those who are on this call. If you could please take a minute to fill this form, your thoughts on how this session has been going, that will be really, really good. Now, I know you've been waiting patiently, Sonia, so I'm using my discretion to give you up to 7 minutes instead of 5. But may I suggest we focus on solutions? For example, this attack in Ghana, for example, some will say if there was proper training, how to stay safe out in the field. I'm not assuming there wasn't, but that will go a long way in protecting colleagues. Just try to avoid trouble, or if things are about to escalate, how do you pull out safely? That is not the solution, of course. We're there to tell stories, but over to you, Sonia.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on this important panel. As a journalist from Southern Africa, I'm going to speak about 2 things. Of course, we speak about solution towards the end. But as a journalist from Southern Africa, I would like to offer a perspective that is often underrepresented in global discussions about surveillance and press freedom. But I'll also give a bit of context for Namibian case in particular, since I'm based in Windhoek, Namibia. While the technological capacity for state surveillance may vary from regions and countries in Africa, the intent to monitor, intimidate, and silence critical voices, which are of journalists, is constant. Is a constant that we recognize all too well. Angela spoke about how journalists cannot do their job very well if they are intimidated, if they are silenced and monitored. And indeed, their critical voices cannot hold their government's accounts, and even those that are in power to account. So in much of Southern Africa, surveillance is not an abstract. It is immediate, it is tangible, and it can also be deeply personal. But more especially those who are not in protective cocoon of large, well-resourced media houses, particularly those that are vulnerable. We operate in environments where media infrastructure are weak, legal protections are inadequate, and cross-border cooperation between governments often facilitates the repressions of investigative reportings rather than protect it. In Namibia, I think a few years ago, we had an issue of everybody must be registered to have a compulsory SIM card. That has also sparked a lot of concerns among potential surveillance and privacy violations, despite, of course, assurances from government authorities who argue that the registration process does not introduce any interceptions capabilities. But this is one of the critical things that you can see, that reporting across borders, whether it's tracking illicit financial flows, smuggling routes, or anything that has to do with corporate governance and corruption, often places journalists in direct confrontation with interest. These interests have the means to use state surveillance tools, smear campaigns, and also even diplomatic channels to silence journalists such as myself. But there's a layer to that that obviously rarely get the intentions it deserves, and that is the gendered nature of surveillance and intimidations for women in particular, where we face a form of surveillance that is just institutional, but also intensely personal. Our private lives as women journalists are weaponized, and threats of sexual violence, these are not incidentals. And these are things that not only in Namibia or Southern Africa in particular, but also across the globe. So, but at what cost? It's not just professional, it's also psychological, that I must say. Many women journalists carry the invisible trauma of being watched, harassed, and hunted online and even offline. And it is something that is also exhausting to navigate both the demands of higher stakes reporting and the emotional labor of staying unbothered. But what can we do, like you ask? Perhaps we need stronger, cross-border solidarity, where journalists are supporting one another, regardless of where they are based, especially with institutions such as that of Angela. We need also tech and legal tools that protects everyone, not just those in capital cities, but even journalists that are working in remote areas such as villages. And we also need global media platforms and donors to recognize that the uneven risk faced by journalists, especially women outside media hubs, can also be protected. So in Southern Africa, we have learned that tools of surveillance evolve, but so much so that our resistance, and resistance means community, because no journalist should have to stand alone in the face of the machinery that basically are designed to silence them. So I think I will stop there and I can take questions later while I stand by.
But I want you to take the questions now because you've made some very incisive remarks. No journalist should stand alone. And then thank you for bringing the gender perspective, cross-border solidarity you've mentioned.
Yes.
Thank you for all of that. So who has questions for Sonia, please? We have over 100 people on this call. Don't be shy. Has anyone got any questions, especially on the gender perspective? Okay.
It seems there was a question that was just typed into the chat. I don't know if that's specific to Sonia or not, but just wanted to flag that.
What can be done to reverse the trend, particularly as it relates to justification of surveillance on the ground of national security? I think that question came from NDBC Okonta. So who would like to take on that?
If I may, and
yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah. I do think that it is important, and I did allude to it in my speech, that we need to use the tools of journalism to expose what is going on. I remember the Premium Times did an excellent investigation related to 2 governors that were using spyware, against the opposition or their critics, journalists, and so forth. And it's when that gets out there that ordinary citizens realize that it is also affecting them. This idea that this is only about protecting journalists, it's not the case, because ultimately it's protecting the citizens' right to know. So in that sense, I do think that good investigative journalism, and I said as much, I said, let's ensure that we start checking, we start reporting on who is being surveilled, what is being used. Look at governments who, some of them, obviously, all you have to do is just to go through the budgets. I mean, that's how we picked up what was going on in Nigeria when it came to certain spyware that was being used by the intelligence services. So if I may, and I sound like a stuck record, but it's really important for journalists to expose what is going on, because once we expose it, that's when we put people under pressure. We just have to look at the Pegasus investigation that went across borders, right? It was because of the investigative work led by Forbidden Stories with newsrooms around the world that people and ordinary citizens actually woke up to the fact that this sort of surveillance, as pernicious as it was happening to so many people around the world. So yes, let's use the tools of journalism to expose who we have to, why, and to then push for those changes to be made by our governments and multilateral institutions. And of course, the companies themselves.
I'm keen for us to explore the gender perspective, especially one given by Sonia in her remarks, because even in war, sexual violence is one of the most atrocious offenses ever. So if female colleagues could be subjected in a quite veiled way, strange way, then that turns everything on its head. I don't know if Queen is still on this call, Makio. Are you still on this call? I don't see your name.
Yes,
Here. Did you say my name, Quinn?
Yeah. Are you able to? Yeah. Are you able to say 1 or 2 things on this good perspective? The
gender perspective.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, the point that Sonia is making is incredibly relevant and incredibly pertinent. one of the things that my organization, as well as CPJ and others at Article 19 that we've done around the world, is we've looked at this program. We've developed a program that is actually investigating exactly what Sonia is saying, which is what is the perspective of threats that women journalists have, which are different from the ones that are often facing other journalists. And increasingly we find that there's so much difference in their experience that people who are designing programs of support really need to design things very specifically for women journalists. The gendered attacks are vicious. The attacks directed at women journalists compared to their male counterparts are often much more vicious, personal, sexual. They'll receive an order of magnitude more vitriol that's directed against them. And the possibility of the online criticism going to offline violence is very high. So that's, I think, one of the things that really need to be taken into account when newsrooms are looking at how to develop programs of safety for journalists, because it is under-resourced at this present time, developing tools and techniques and practice specifically for women, addressing the gender gap that's there in terms of the violent rhetoric that can often lead to physical attacks.
Very much for that. Whoever wants to make a contribution, now is the time to do so. Someone is feeling that there is something urgent, contribute. If not, we can go ahead. So in terms of working together, actually, to highlight issues of harassment and intimidation, I'm sure if the news goes out there that colleagues have been harassed, Uncle Dapo's team will be more than willing to pick on that story and publicize it. However, critical as that is, some people were quick to pick holes on the quality of our journalism. I'm sure there are journalists and there are journalists as well. Without the ethical foundation, that's why when I was introducing Angela, said it can't be like more nightmarish than this, having a lawyer and at the same time a journalist. The establishment is in for a very long day. Now, if we have colleagues that put out stories that do not actually measure up to the legal and ethical standards, what then do we do? I don't know if anyone can answer that from experience, because in the name of activism these days online, I see all sorts of half-truths, rumors, and all sorts of half-baked stories being published in the name of journalism at the same time. Yeah. Is there anyone with a perspective on this, Fisayo?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. Please take that again.
Yes, what I'm saying is, even though we are duty-bound to protect colleagues, to stand by colleagues, however, if you look at the internet today, there are so many stories that do not measure up to the ethical and legal standards, and they are being passed off for journalism. So what then do we do? It's like a moral dilemma. On the one hand, we are out to advance freedom of expression. However, we got to where we got to in this work by doing ethical and professional journalism. So how do we balance this?
Thank you. I really don't even think it's a moral dilemma. If false stories have been published, or if stories have been published because envelopes exchanged hands, the reporting of that kind of situation needs to focus on prosecuting the journalists through due process, which is that if someone writes something wrong against a state official, they have the right to sue. They have the right to bring it to a court of law and cause a determination on their innocence, such that the journalists in question then serve their time for what they've done. So even if a story is intentionally or unintentionally false, it doesn't justify sending security officials to Ishegun Olatunji, for instance. I hope I got them correctly. And then to whisk him away, deny him access to his family. There is no place under the law for that kind of behavior, using state apparatus to track people for what they've published and then just throw them into a dungeon for days, for weeks, for months. So in that kind of situation, the focus would then not be about it's an attack on the press. It's an attack on press freedom. The focus then is, look, set these guys free and go to court, follow the proper channel and establish that a wrong has been done against you. So in situations like that, the reporting is an attack on press freedom. There have been one or two situations like that. I think with a bank recently, it's for us to also as an institution hold the likes of the Nigerian Guild of Editors, the Nigerian Union of Journalists to, higher standards. Their activities should not be limited to issuing Governor of the Year awards, to people in public office. It should also be about strengthening the quality of media practice, looking at trainings that bring journalists together, looking at trainings on ethics that speak about, the damage to the credibility of the journalist, of the organization, of the industry when false stories are published.
We'll read some of the questions and comments that have come through. Emmanuel Obe, poor or no pay of journalists is a major threat to press freedom in Nigeria. Journalists have to give in to accepting envelopes to kill some stories. I hope I got that right. And then Ruth Kelly Guiado, what about those who say that it is not worth losing your life over a story? Therefore, journalists shouldn't push too hard on stories that are dangerous, like exposing those in power. Who would like to comment on this?
I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I feel that, telling journalists no story is worth your life is just one side of the coin.
Okay.
Another side of the coin is also that fortune favors the brave. I think that with the kind of problems we have with corruption, with injustice in Africa, I think that there is a need for journalists who do the job with hearts, who understand the direct link between what they do and the public interest and democracy and the future of their countries. So while it is true that no story is worth the life of a journalist on the one hand, the other hand, journalists also have to recognize that the bravery, courage, hearts, are characteristics that we need in this part of the world to do journalism. And the center of those two statements would then be why we do the kind of journalism that we do. If it's about the public interest, if it is not about noise, if it's not about accolades, if it's not about popularity, fame, awards, if those are not the primary driving forces, I think that every brave journalist knows where to draw the lines, where you get to a point where you think, okay, this will be going too far. So I think if journalism is done with public interest, journalists will always know when to stop. That line of no story is worth your life, no story is worth your life, keeps ringing, but the other side, people don't talk about it as often as possible. But in a place like Nigeria, for instance, how can you do journalism without heart? I mean, how can you even honestly opinionate in a whole government account
as editors, before we put reporters over the line, we have to have in-house safety protocols and measures in place to protect them. Yes, so that these measures need to be properly communicated to all colleagues, especially those that are always willing to take on very dangerous stories. Okay, we have Sunday Kolawale. The line between investigative reporting and the public interest clause seems to be getting thinner by the day. How do journalists navigate this terrain of investigative reporting and not get caught in the web of expecting from journalists to be partners in government? In other words, where does the brief end for a journalist working in a state-owned media organization to delve into investigative journalism? Let's say you're working for the national broadcaster and you want to do investigative journalism. So how do you go about it? This, I think, is what I'm reading, what I'm understanding from this question. Will anyone like to say something, share an experience? If not, I will move on. But before I do that, Mohammed Yerima Balla was raising his hand. If you are still on this call, please turn on the microphone for Mohammed Yerima Balla. In the absence of Yerima Balla, we have Rahman Abiola raising his hand. Rahman Abiola, are you still on this call?
Yes, I'm on this call. Thank you so much. This is Rahman Abiola, the
Go
editor-in-chief
ahead, please.
of I don't know if you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm very happy we're having this conversation. It's really important, and I quickly want to share my experience. Let me first introduce myself. I'm a journalist with over a decade of experience, and I'm currently leading a team of journalists at legit.ng and some of our projects in Africa. So I understand what it means to be harassed, especially by the power that be. And I'm going to share my experience. Last year, I was invited by the Nigerian police from Lagos to Abuja because someone petitioned us. They didn't tell us what we actually, what report, but it was directed to me, and it wasn't stated if it was the petition was against me as the editor-in-chief in my capacity as editor-in-chief, or probably as a journalist. So it wasn't stated. So I understand how it played out. What I did was I sent my lawyer to drop the response, and after my response was dropped at their office, also sent to them electronically. They didn't get back to us, and that was how the case died down. But for some weeks, being a first-time experience for me, not like someone like Fisher Shirombo, so I was in fear. It was really an experience for me. Now, this is what I want to look at. So when we are looking at the future of journalism in respect to transparency, accountability, and social justice, I believe the next generation of journalists coming, they should be made aware of the opportunities in the field, number one, and then the bottlenecks while working as a journalist. And number two, and three is that how they can navigate whenever they have issues of probably Nigerian police or maybe any institution in Nigeria is after them, how they can navigate. Most of the journalists most of the younger journalists, they don't even know where to run to, apart from probably an upper management in their newsroom. And I'm very sure if you work in a newsroom that doesn't guarantee total safety, that is going to be a problem. I mean, we've seen a situation whereby journalists are being thrown under the bus, even by their home management, because they can't just deal with that pressure. So I want this center and everybody who is interested in promoting hardcore journalism, investigative journalism, we should be having conversation around how journalists can explore other alternatives, like the CPJ, for instance, how they can reach out to people there, and probably some organizations that are responsible for protecting journalists. These are the things many young journalists that I know don't particularly know, apart from they taking their job, go on feed writing stories. Thank you.
Okay, it is horrendous actually to learn that editors forsake reporters when the chips are down. That is unethical and completely unacceptable. That is why it's important to have an in-house protocol, clearly communicated. Everyone should be well trained just to be safe. And then if someone is uncomfortable about any story, they mustn't be pushed into covering that story. I have a question that I would like to direct to Angela Quintel, and it is from Mohammed Yerima Balla. What was this organization doing in helping retired journalists who are suffering from depression, anxiety, and trauma? That I know for a fact, especially for colleagues who covered different wars from one conflict zone to another. By the time you did Syria, Gaza, Ukraine, I'm sure you will not come out a normal person after all that, yeah, even in retirement. Angela?
Thank you for that question. I think the one thing that we have seen as the Committee to Protect Journalists and various other organizations who are working in this field is that trauma support has become incredibly important for newsrooms. And many organizations, including my own, actually do offer trauma support to journalists. And you don't only have to be a war correspondent. Just being in this job can be dangerous enough. I mean, we spoke about surveillance. Can you imagine what people go through when they realize that their entire lives have been opened up to government spooks who are looking at their private conversations and so on and so forth? That sort of the trauma that brings in itself is obviously also debilitating, right? And it's important to have that psychological support, the trauma support. And what's good to see is that over the years, more and more journalists are no longer gung-ho about their jobs. Once upon a time, you would say, oh, I've just got to it's one of the things that's part of the job. I've just got to toughen up. No. There are sufficient resources for trauma support out there. And it's a matter of knowing where to find it. But if you go to CPJ's website, as I said earlier, cpj.org, you'll find a whole bunch of resources there that will also point you to the direction of organizations that would be in a position to assist in what they do, including CPJ. There are the DART Center, for example, in the US does excellent work in terms of trauma support. And also, I talk about the South African National Editors Forum has gone and started a program with a particular group of counselors in South Africa, 24-hour hotline available for journalists who need the kind of trauma support that you've mentioned. And I think more and more we're seeing even newsrooms themselves, even those who aren't as resourced, that they are ensuring that that sort of mental support, the trauma support for psychological support for journalists are available. And then freelance journalists, because we all know what's happening in the industry. Many journalists are now freelance journalists. Where do they turn to? The good news is that there are resources out there. They're available. As journalists, you can find them, Google it, but go to organizations, as I said, like CPJ, like RSF, a whole bunch of them. I mentioned earlier in the chat that there's something called the Journalists in Distress Network. And it's a bunch of organizations working in the same field who are cooperating and ensuring that by working together, they're able to do more for more people as opposed to just doing something for less. And I don't know whether I'm making myself clear, but if you can imagine how many journalists around the world need support, and if one organization or if all organizations only, assist 3 journalists and they all assist those 3 journalists, it means that hundreds of other journalists are not getting the support. So it's a case of ensuring that we coordinate, and that if CPJ is unable to assist because they're helping another journalist, the Reporters Sans Frontières will be helping the other journalist. And so those are the resources that are available. And that is the good news. It's not all just doom and gloom, people. There are organizations, there are individuals, and there are other professionals who, with journalists, are supporting journalists. So there are psychologists out there that are working with journalists. There are lawyers who are taking up cases pro bono to assist journalists. This is a community that goes beyond just journalists. We are all in this together. We have activists, we have lawyers, we have doctors, we have a whole bunch of people that are prepared to assist because they know that ultimately protecting journalists, supporting journalists is protecting and supporting democracy and the right of the public to know.
The forms have gone out to give feedback on this session, please. If you haven't already completed the forms, please do so now. We are running out of time, but it is important to highlight one fundamental issue, which is the financial health of our newsrooms, because financial independence is integral. In fact, is key, sine qua non to editorial integrity and editorial independence. Colin Oyingbe sent us a question saying, journalists, especially in Nigeria, are not being paid well. I think I will take the liberty of saying this is a global problem, global pandemic. How do you think those journalists can be empowered to do their work efficiently? Now, this is very important because if journalists are not being paid well, it makes them vulnerable to financial inducement. And therefore, the content will be compromised. I don't know who has taken on this, or someone would like to take on this very important issue from experience. And this I would like to direct to our publishers. Uncle Dapo, do you want to take on this issue? Because it is at the heart of everything we've been discussing. If we don't have enough money to pay our reporters well, we know exactly what will be happening out there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think it's a major crisis. The fact that journalism itself, particularly once we transited into that digital era, we then suffered this massive attrition, not only of the kinds of revenue base, or generally, I think you have called a business model today, how businesses make money. Traditionally, it's been in a form that media will make money through advertising, will make money through the kinds of events that we are able to generate, or sales, as the case may be. The transition to digital has really created a fundamental crisis in that respect. Now, I say this not as an excuse, but for us to understand the background around which, a lot of what is happening in the newsrooms, must be understood. In our own context, is a double situation, because one, the capacity, in fact, within the management of many of those institutions are not tuned to understand how to really innovate around some of those practices, on how to really open new channels or revenue channels and so on. So it's a major fact, therefore, that newsrooms are really in dire straits, and there are new ways that people are dealing with this problem in other parts of the world. Take a little cue from South Africa, where they have had to now confront technology companies that's been the major channel for vacuuming revenue away from media, and they're really working out some solutions. It's done in Canada, it's done in Australia. Many other markets are looking at these kinds of things. That may be one way to look at it. More realistically, people are also, philanthropies have helped in one way or the other, but again, it's not going to go around, so to say. So particularly as for the local news, which is so important for the kind of work that we're talking about here. If you want to build a resilient democracy, if you want to build development goals that are faithful, we want to build accountability at grassroots levels. We're really talking about newspapers or radio stations that are really in local, sometimes rural areas, that really have to struggle very, very hard about that. Now, governments have responded to this in some ways, mostly in Francophone Africa, borrowing in fact from the French tradition in Europe. They found ways to say that because democracy, journalism is so fundamental as an element of democracy, there should be state appropriation that goes straight into that way. And in most of these countries, the understanding is that the money does not come from the executive; it comes straight from a legislative fund. Just a way of trying to control that. These are things that could be looked at, even in the United States, the states of New Jersey, for instance, and Minnesota. Governments have seen the value of this. I believe North Carolina also, and there's appropriation now into local media straight from governments. So it's not an easy way out. What is missing? Yeah, just to summarize, what I think is missing in our country is a collective conversation around how to get out of this problem. First, to analyze it and understand what it means specifically, and then understand how to design the right kinds of strategies. In the absence of that, everybody's going in route and circles and trying, to find a way out of this. But this is an existential crisis for the media. And existential crises are really never solved by individual lone rangers who think that they can do it. You have to bunch together. It's a very collaborative response that we need to seek. Again, it's a way to call on institutions like the Publishers Institution, the Guild of Editors, and perhaps the unions. And this is something they should be doing rather than what they seem to be more interested in doing today. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Fulako, for your comments. I have a question on my own on this, but not before I take contributions from Dr. Kole Shetima, Africa Director of the McCarthy Foundation. There are several organizations working in this space locally and internationally. We need to cooperate and work with each other. We shouldn't operate in silos. Yeah, that's well noted. I think duplication is a problem. But back to what I wanted to ask, will it be a good idea to come up with a unified salary structure for journalists that should be indexed, do you think, Dagbo?
I don't believe so. I know the Union of Journalists took I think, a wrong-headed approach in this direction and thought this would be done. I don't see, apart from being that it's impractical, then, I mean, it's not government where you then have to set salary scales and things like that. Most of the, media organizations are in the private sector. And both in terms of scale, some people may want to do a very small community newspaper, say perhaps no more than for a street. Obviously, their own revenue capacity will disproportionate to a large scale thing. And the kind of journalism that is possible and afforded today just by the reality of the digital kind of age that we found ourselves meant that you this large scale controlled mechanisms of producing and distributing content is fading out. One must agree. And how will we then regulate salary for that street newspaper, for say a big newspaper like This Day? So I think it's impractical, and I don't think that really is the organizations will know, the capacity. What is important is the kinds of revenue they can build to make themselves very operationally capable. And obviously that then means, how also staff must also earn a livable wage. I think it's something that the Union of Journalists has pursued, but I think it's one of those things that they never really understand the mandate properly. we'll be doing. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for your time. I earlier on saw that Bingpe, there's a hand up. Bingpe's hand. Is Bingpe still on this call, please? Okay. If not, I will go on reading some of these common political factors, such as government censorship, potential harassment, have hindered investigative journalism in a very big way. Most of the news platforms in Nigeria are owned by politicians. How can we, how then can a great investigative work be carried out in this manner? This question came from Ola Awaka. Thank you for your comment. Moturai, are we running out of time? If we are, I would like to call on you to make the final remarks. Presumably we are. If not, let me know.
Yeah, 15
Okay.
minutes for final words perhaps from the panelists. And then...
Okay.
Jimmy,
all right.
Please, before
yes, please.
you do that, there's a question that then went down the stream. If you don't mind, the gentleman who asked the question, if you work in a government newspaper,
yes,
or government media, what are the channels open for you to do investigative? I think it's important to understand that not all investigative reporting will bring you in harm's way, so to say. There's
exactly.
so many things. I mean, we want to improve society, we want to improve communities. I mean, you could take local issues that have been so troubling. There's so many social issues, so many cultural issues that are just people just are living in ignorance about, and we really need to open them up. I think, of course, it's become quite seductive. Not every investigative journalist will be like the bearded freestyle, and then go and get locked up or announce. In Ghana the other day, and one professor in the communication school expressed her frustration that, look, all the kids come today, we want to put a little mask like Anna's, thinking that that's the only way to do investigative journalism. I think it's important that we have just a very broad canvas around where we can improve society, we can make community work, we can make institutions more functional. And all these things are open for those who want to do investigative reporting. That means they want to do it more thoroughly, do more forensic work around that than, straight line reporting. So, and I can't see why.
That is where Dr. Cole, sorry for cutting you short.
That's fine, yes, sir.
That's where Dr. Cole's comment comes in handy, the need to collaborate, because we need to cross-pollinate these ideas. Some people don't really understand what it means to hold power to account. They simply understand it to be that, you go exposing the dirty secrets of those in power, and you can actually do it without getting into trouble. For example, something as simple as highlighting the fact that people are violating the green areas in Abuja, areas that are not meant to be constructed on, and then you see the structures being erected left, right, and center.
Yeah.
If you work for the NTA, for example, the national broadcaster, and you highlight this, I'm not sure someone will call for you to be sacked or arrested just because it is a government-owned outfit, but because they've been trained into thinking that everything coming out of that should be positive, whatever that is, then that is where the problem lies. And then if there's this collaboration, then people will begin to have new ideas and new ways of thinking. Yeah, that's just my personal take. I will give 2 minutes each now to our panelists, starting with Sonia for your final remarks.
Thank you so much. I think as we reflect on the broader challenges journalists faces, we must not overlook the deeply gendered nature of surveillance, intimidation, and harassment, especially targeting women journalists. Their experiences is distinct, more invasive, and often more psychologically damaging than their counterparts, which are males. I think until women journalists are truly safe, in my personal point of view, online and offline, press freedom will never be complete. Their safety is not a gender issue, it is a journalism issue, a democracy issue, and a human right issue. Thank you so much.
And as editor, I remember we had a special forum for female colleagues to contribute ideas and to suggest ways forward that went way up to the highest level of the organization, and that actually worked. And I know we have NAWAJ, the Association of Female Journalists, but individual organizations, for individual organizations, my humble suggestion will also be to encourage a special forum for female journalists, because some of the peculiarities of the challenges are only faced by them. Thank you. So, Queen, if you are still on this call, you have 2 minutes for your final remarks.
Sure, thank you. And thank you so much again for the invitation to join with the dialogue today. I just wanted to maybe end by emphasizing some of the points that have been made in the chat, which is that there are tools out there for journalists to help protect themselves against intrusive surveillance. Yes, there is military-grade spyware that can use like zero-click exploits on phones, but if you keep your software up to date and you use encrypted tools to protect yourself and your communications with sources and others, you can be more protected than otherwise. Also related to this, don't be fooled by people saying, for example, that you can have some encryption and the government can still break it in some way, and yet the encryption will still be protected. There's no such thing as partially broken encryption. You either break it or you have it. And the government and national security experts often try and muddy this water. So in terms of debates nationally, one thing to really focus on is you have to protect encryption and push back on attempts to try and break encryption, because otherwise those tools that can protect journalists from intrusive surveillance are nearly worthless. So thank you for that. And thank you for those who are raising the point about using encrypted communication channels in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Queen. But that also calls for training and awareness in individual newsrooms. Yeah, there has to be a mandatory training for digital hygiene, staying safe online and all that. Again, our publishers have to take the lead on this. Fisayo, you have the floor now, 2 minutes. You're on mute, sir. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So my closing words would be that right now, if the government really wants to get you, the government will. It's all too tilted in their favor. You can really hide for some weeks, for months, but with the quality of surveillance tools at the disposition of the government will find you, and we have to tilt that balance. It has to get to a point where journalists indeed have hope that they can survive the government's many surveillance tactics. The final point from me would be that this topic appears to be a subject of concern only to journalists. If we were to check the attendees here, you find that 80 to 90% are journalists or people who work in and around the media. But then I do think it's not a matter of journalistic concern. It's a matter of urgent public interest concern. The public have to know how their right to know gets attacked, their right to make decisions, their right to information, their right to knowledge about the true workings of their government. We need to find a way to get the public more involved and see this as an attack on them rather than just an attack on journalists. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Just to buttress and repeat the cliche that an attack on one is an attack on all society. Thank you very much. And finally, Motunrayo. for your closing remarks.
Yes,
For your vote
thank
of
you.
thanks,
Thank you,
as we say.
everyone. Thank you, Angela Quintal. Thank you, Sonia Smith. Thank you, Fisaya Sheyombo. Thank you, Queen Matthew. Thank you, Jimmy Sally. And of course,
you are a bit faint, Moturayo. May I request you to lift the mic
I
towards your
think that
mouth
I'll
a bit?
just highlight a couple of things as I close. It is just, can you hear from?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Try. You need to project more.
I think she's frozen.
Yeah, she's frozen completely. Motorayo, if you can hear me, please turn off
Yes,
the
I can hear.
video. Yeah. Turn off the video so we can get clear audio from you. Yeah, it's better now. And then project a bit more.
Okay, thank you. So I was thanking the panelists. So thank you all for joining. But I just wanted to underscore a few things, starting for where Fisayo stopped, which is why I think in the last 3 years or 4 years or so, we've done so many meetings, so many gatherings as an organization on civic space, the safety of journalists, and other related matters, because we find that the surveillance and the attack on dissent is sophisticated, and it is intentional, such that it is a huge threat to society, not just journalism, but to our entire society. And we need to collaborate more and that is why we expanded to the conversation globally, to be a global conversation. We need to collaborate more to treat this as an attack on truth and as an attack on the society that we desire to see. Also, we also need to have on the fact that we don't talk enough about the fact that the responsibility to protect journalists and to protect society and protect truth is equally on the government. It is the duty of government equally to protect journalists and protect truth. And there is a need for us to emphasize this, because it seems like we're on one side and government is on the other side, and they should do the attack, and we will do especially in democracies, we must begin to hold governments responsible to this. And then also I would like to also emphasize, the larger cloud of fear that this surveillance brings. People just do not want to speak any longer. The civic space is threatened. People are wondering, if I say this, can I be picked up? Can something happen to me? Am I really safe to just make a comment? And this is why, media literacy and rights of people understanding their rights is critical. And then finally, I find that the media owners and leaders of journalism need to take more ownership of the protection of journalists and the protection of the civic space. We need to take more ownership. There are so many organizations, CPJ, CJIJ, WSIJ, the Media Rights Agenda, there's so many organizations doing great work for the protection of journalists. But editors, owners of newsrooms need to be more frontal and play the front role in actually protecting journalists generally and the civic space, together. And I thank you all very much for joining us. Happy birthday again to Professor Wole Soyinka. And I hope that, these conversations will not just continue, but that we'll continue to collaborate more and have, solidarity meetings and come together more to ensure that journalists are safer, but also to ensure that our civic space is safer and more robust, so that we all can have the kind of society that we want. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for your time. Sonia, is it the case that you've raised your hand now? Do you have your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to say something to our friends and colleagues that are in Nigeria. Please extend our warmest wishes to the professor. We celebrate his life and legacy, and we wish him continued good health and strength on his birthday. As someone that also is working on a book on the work here in Namibia, I think the work of Professor Wole Soyinka is really impressive. over decades and decades of good work. And we just wish him well. I know he's 91, and that's a very long life he's blessed with. And we hope that he's still with us for a few more years. Please extend our warmest
One
wishes.
thing is sure, he'll be drinking wine somewhere.
Thank you, Soya.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, everyone.
Thank you for your
Angela.
time, everyone.
Thank
you.
you,
Thank you
Saleh,
for
Dapo.
devoting an important chunk of your weekend to this
All
course, which is.
Thank you so much for joining us on this Sunday.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and
Thanks,
gentlemen.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
All the best.
Okay, Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.